Tonight at 10, jobs and prosperity must come first in any Brexit deal. The Chancellor spells out his priorities. Philip Hammond said that while people had voted to leave the EU, they hadn't voted to make themselves poorer. The Bank of England echoed the Chancellor's remarks, which are seen as a signal that he wants a change of emphasis in the Brexit process.
We will leave the EU, but it must be done in a way that works for Britain, in a way that prioritises British jobs and underpins Britain's prosperity.
Mr Hammond also insisted that immigration needed to be managed but not shut down. We'll have more on this major intervention by the Chancellor in the Brexit debate. Also tonight, the latest images of the attack outside a mosque in North London, where a local imam intervened to stop further violence.
The true heroes are those who arrived on the scene right at the start, and the heroes are those in the hospital now, suffering with injuries, some of them life-threatening.
9 years after the financial crisis, Barclays Bank and 4 former executives are charged with fraud. Britain is facing its longest heatwave since 1995, and if it lasts until Friday, the longest since 1976.
And he does it with an ace. What a win! What a win!
And at Queen's, a shock defeat in the first round for Andy Murray, losing in straight sets.
And coming up in Sports Day on BBC News, it's not all bad news for British tennis as Joanna Konta books her place in the last 16 at the Egon Classic in Birmingham.
For the 5th straight year.
Good evening. A few technical problems tonight for which we apologise, but on the eve of the Queen's speech and in the week the formal Brexit talks got underway, the Chancellor has defined his own goals for the negotiation ahead. Philip Hammond said that jobs and economic prosperity had to be priorities in the Brexit talks, and he stressed that immigration needed to be managed, not shut down. Mr Hammond said that while people had voted to leave the EU, they had not, in his view, voted to make themselves poorer. The Chancellor's comments in the City of London were welcomed by some business leaders, as our economics editor Kamal Ahmed reports now.
A year on from the referendum, and cars waiting in sunny Southampton for a journey to the continent of Europe. Exports to the European Union like these are a key driver of our economy, an economy the Chancellor said would now be at the heart of those complicated Brexit negotiations. Speaking at the Mansion House in central London, Philip Hammond said without a flexible deal with the EU, the economy could be at risk.
That when the British people voted last June, they did not vote to become poorer or less secure. They did vote to leave the EU, and we will leave the EU. But it must be done in a way that works for Britain, in a way that prioritises British jobs and underpins Britain's prosperity.
Alongside Mr Hammond today, the Governor of the Bank of England. He said that Brexit was likely to make people poorer and that there would need to be a transition period after the completion of the Brexit process in 2019.
Now, monetary policy cannot prevent weaker real income growth that's likely to accompany the transition to new trading arrangements with the EU. It can support households and businesses as they adjust to such profound change.
The two great economic offices of state. Here's the Bank of England, and about 2 miles down the road that way, the Treasury. And the leaders of those two institutions, I think, came together today to make one big point about Brexit. Put the economic wealth of Britain first, they both said, even if that means some sacrifices on those controversial issues of sovereignty and strict controls on immigration.
The City may support that position, but from Mr Hammond's own colleagues, a reminder of why many voted Brexit on June the 23rd.
We want to ensure that business gets access to the labour that it needs, but there's also a strong worry amongst people in Britain that people are coming to the United Kingdom and using our public services who may not be contributing to our national wealth. That is the problem that the government will deal with, and we'll deal with that in a reasonable way over a period of time.
There were plenty of warnings today from the Chancellor and the Governor. Higher prices, struggling consumers, the need for a good Brexit deal. And even those who see bold opportunities ahead are aware there are trade-offs.
I don't think there's any doubt that since the Brexit referendum, the pound has fallen. Now, it's glass half full or half empty. Clearly, that's meant that there's higher inflation, and that's had a knock-on effect for real incomes. But on the other hand, it's been a much-needed boost to exports. We really did need that boost because the currency was overvalued.
It was a day for stepping back and taking the wider view on the economy. An economy for consumers so uncertain, Mr Carney said there would be no interest rate rises in the near future. Sunny today, yes, but there could be more squally weather ahead. Kamal Ahmed, BBC News.
Well, let's go live to Westminster and talk to our Deputy Political Editor, John Pienaar. And John, thoughts first of all on this contribution by Philip Hammond today and what it signifies?
It was, Hugh, an assertion of newfound and in some ways unexpected authority. Phil Hammond didn't contradict the official government line, but he did take on the hard-line view of some Brexiteers in the party and in the cabinet. He set out his own vision for example, a transition period on the way to Brexit, long enough to satisfy business they were being shielded from the impact of Brexit. And that included long enough to deal with migration numbers. So no rush to cut migration until British workers had the skills necessary to fill the jobs that bring in migrant workers. We see now Phil Hammond, a man who might have been sacked if Theresa May had got the results she'd hoped for. Instead, he's a powerful player. And as for Brexit, well, from where we are now, the outcome of that story, I think, Hugh, nobody can really say.
And here we are, John, on the eve of the Queen's speech, where the government's going to set out its legislative plans for the year or two ahead. What do you think people should look out for?
We'll look out for a Queen's speech, a government programme, which will be shorn of anything likely to lead to any kind of untimely, embarrassing government defeat. Instead, we'll see a government programme with a positive view of Brexit running through it like lettering through a stick of rock. So there will be a measure to bring back to Britain law-making powers. There'll be measures on the economy, there'll be measures on security and measures on fairness. In other words, the kind of positive vision that a lot of Tories say now they wish they'd had to spread during the election campaign, and they believe might have led to a more positive result. We'll never know whether they're right about that. We do know they're having to live with the result of what was a poor campaign, and that is relative weakness and great uncertainty at a time of great national change.
John, once again, thanks very much. John Pienaar there for us, our Deputy Political Editor at Westminster. Now, police are still questioning a man in connection with the attack on Muslim worshippers in North London. Darren Osborne, who's 47 from Cardiff, was arrested on suspicion of terrorism offences. 9 people were taken to hospital and 1 man who had been taken ill before the attack died at the scene. The attack has led to renewed calls for the government to review changes to police funding, as our Home Affairs correspondent Daniel Sanford explains now.
He was underneath, we had to lift the van. We had to lift the van. The chaos caused by the attack on Sunday night was captured in these dramatic new pictures. A hired van had ploughed into a group of people marking the holy Muslim month of Ramadan. 9 ended up in hospital and 1 man died. Amongst the crowd were Abdul Matin Chowdhury and his 13-year-old son Tahsin Ahmed Chowdhury. Today they were recovering at home in their garden. Because Abdul Matin has little English, his son spoke for both of them.
I saw an angry driver in a van, in a company van. He looked at Muslims and gathered around. After that, he just drove through, and then he hit like 7 or 8 people, and one was underneath a van. My dad got hit on his shoulder and next to his legs.
The doctors say my ankle is broken.
The hired van ran over Yasin Hersey's foot and ankle, breaking them both. He was allowed home from hospital today and told me he'd been trying to help the man who died when he was hit.
I fall down and I look at my phone and I see the guy bleeding on the head and the other guy lying next to me, and he was just kind of unconscious. So I stood up and tried and help those guys, and then when I stand up I fall down, and then the other guys come to me and say, look, you don't have to stand up. They drag me off the road and they say the guy is going to strike again.
This was a cold, calculated cruelty to cause chaos and to divide communities.
Witnesses have told us that the van came down Seven Sisters Road at speed, turning into this cul-de-sac and knocking down the worshippers as it came through. It then came to a rest between those 2 bollards. The bollard that it hit has been removed, and when it came to a stop, a young man was trapped underneath the van, though he has survived. The suspected driver, Darren Osborne from Cardiff, is being held on suspicion of murder, attempted murder and terrorist offences. When he was grabbed by bystanders at the scene, the local imam intervened, explaining today why he wanted to deliver the suspect safely to the police.
Had anything happened to him, then extra bloodshed does not deliver justice to the families, and it provides no answers.
And as the horror of Sunday night sinks in, there are suggestions tonight that the government might be rethinking planned changes to police funding that would affect the larger forces like London's Metropolitan Police.
We're stretched, and I'm talking with the Mayor and I'm talking with the government about the resources that we need, I believe, in the future.
After 3 months of terror, the government's approach to police funding may be starting to change. Daniel Sanford, BBC News, Finsbury Park.
And tonight, Belgian police say that a man who caused a small explosion in the central train station in Brussels has been shot. No one else is believed to have been injured. The central station and a nearby square were crowded with tourists at the time, but they've since been evacuated. Police say that the situation is under control. But for the latest, we're going to talk now to our correspondent, Damien Grammaticus, who's in Brussels. And Damien, what's the latest you have there and what happened?
Hugh, what we've heard is from a witness who was in the station at the time when this happened. It was almost exactly 8:45 p.m. local time. He said it was moderately busy. This man saw a device, something on the ground, burst into flames. There was an ignition. He said there was not an explosion. It was almost as if some sort of trigger device went off, but nothing else exploded. So there was a burst of flames. This package bag, whatever it was, caught fire. What we then heard, that witness left the scene very quickly, didn't see anyone injured. The deputy station master has told us he saw a man running from the scene or leaving the scene quickly, go back into the station. Then the security forces, who were there very quickly, opened fire on an individual they believed had carried out the detonation, shot him, wounded him. And what we've heard is that bomb disposal teams were sent in at the time. They examined this individual who was wounded on the ground to make sure there was no more explosives before he was then taken to hospital. Now, we understand that individual survived the shooting. We're waiting for some more information from police. They sealed down the whole area. It's all been under control since then and quite calm in the streets all around.
Damien, thank you very much for the update there. Damien Grammaticus in Brussels tonight. Now, the emergency response team dealing with the aftermath of the Grenfell Tower fire in West London said that all the survivors have been found temporary accommodation. Earlier today, it said that £250,000 had been given to families. Nearly a week on from the disaster, in which at least 79 people died, our special correspondent, Lucy Manning, has been talking to some families about their experiences.
Last week, Grenfell was home. This time last Tuesday, meals were being eaten. TVs watched, children in bed. Now it's a place where families are lost, where those who survived can't return, and they are still searching for help. Will Thompson helped save his neighbour from the fire. He's been given a hotel room to live in.
A hotel's a hotel and a home's a home, and they're not the same thing. No matter how good they treat us in a hotel, it's not my home. My home's over there in Ashes.
And what have they said? Sorry, Will.
This is almost a week after the fire. I'm really, really angry. And I don't want to be there. I want to be at home with my family.
Yesterday we met Miguel Alves in his hotel room. Today it's no longer his family's home.
They threw me out from the hotel because it was fully booked from today.
Oh no,
and
so what are you going to do?
And they give us another hotel in Earl's Court. And now we have to move everything back to the Earl's Court.
You know, if we could find somewhere a more permanent place to stay, you know, to try and get back to some sort of normal life, it will give us some time to mourn over the friends that we've lost in the fire.
Nina Masro walks with her suitcase. She lived in the estate underneath the tower.
Besides being a refugee in my own community, I'm taking my suitcase home to go and get some clothing, some more school uniform bits for my children. So I'm now in a hotel, with my children who are studying, who are going through exams and through a lot of trauma. They're having counselling themselves. Is it safe? We need somebody to categorically tell us, yes, it's safe for you to return.
The help for survivors does now seem better organised, but it's taken a week to get here, and there are still major concerns about housing, about safety, and especially about trust.
I would not say that we're on top of the situation, because this task is enormous, and an issue that is incredibly important is about the voice of the community. We've only just started, I think, really reaching into the community.
And everywhere here, the pictures that are too much to bear. The children and their teacher of Avondale Park Primary, Nadia, Zainab, Fatima, Firdaus, Jacob and Myrna, so proud in their uniforms. Lucy Manning, BBC News, West London.
Barclays and 4 of the bank's former senior executives have been charged with committing fraud during the financial crisis of 2008. The charges relate to the way the bank raised billions of pounds from investors in Qatar, which meant that Barclays was able to avoid being rescued by the British taxpayer. The former chief executive, John Varley, is among those due to appear in court next month, as our business editor Simon Jack tells us.
Charged with criminal conduct, Barclays and 4 members of the bank's top brass, including former chief executive John Varley and former head of Barclays' Middle Eastern business, Roger Jenkins. This is the first time senior executives of any British bank have faced criminal proceedings for their conduct during the financial crisis. While the UK government was busy using taxpayers' money to rescue RBS and Lloyds, Barclays came here to Qatar for emergency cash to keep it afloat. In 2008, Barclays raised a total of £12 billion from Middle Eastern investors, including Qatar Holding, the state-owned investment fund. There was a sweetener. £332 million was paid to Qatar for advisory services, payments that weren't disclosed. Not only that, but Barclays lent £2 billion to Qatar Holding, allegedly to buy shares in Barclays. Lending others money to buy your shares is illegal. So why did Barclays turn down government money? The chief executive at the time, and one of the people charged today, said this to MPs in 2009.
The circumstances were very far from normal. We needed speed, we needed certainty, and we needed size. And looking back on it, I have to say, given the extreme fragility of the sentiment in the markets at that time, I am very glad indeed that we managed to raise the capital that we did raise at that time.
Government ministers at the time have a different explanation.
Barclays did not want to have anything to do with UK government money. I believe that was partly because of a political view that this would look like creeping nationalisation, and also, quite frankly, because the UK government's money came with quite strong restrictions on bonuses.
Now, if it's proven that crimes were committed here, to some it still won't be clear who the victims were. Customers weren't effective, the taxpayer didn't have to shell out, and shareholders in Barclays did better than shareholders in RBS or Lloyds. But others will say rules are rules. And if this approach of prosecuting individuals as well as institutions helps change a stubborn culture throughout banking of not following those rules, then that is no bad thing.
Now we're starting to move to a more American approach where individuals are in the frame for doing things wrong within the business world. That is likely to concentrate people's minds and make them think about, is what I'm about to do a really sensible thing if it's going to be me standing in the dock?
Fraud convictions can carry sentences of up to 10 years, but these are only charges. Roger Jenkins and another defendant, Richard Both, have said they will defend themselves vigorously. John Varley is yet to comment, and Barclays, the company, said it was considering its position. Simon Jack, BBC News.
Britain is heading for its longest heatwave since 1995, according to the Met Office, and it's possible that tomorrow could be the hottest June day since 1976. There's also a very big risk in some parts of heavy rain or thunderstorms. Extreme weather is also causing problems in other countries, including France and Spain and Portugal. Our science editor, David Schuckman, has been considering the latest evidence on these volatile weather conditions.
The terrifying sight of one of the most aggressive forest fires that Portugal has seen for years. As a heat wave took hold, whole families have been caught in their cars. More than 60 people in all have died, and the fires have advanced with devastating speed. There was a massive noise, says this survivor, and then we saw the flames. We'd never seen anything like it, according to this man. It all happened in just a few seconds.
Anybody want a bottle of water?
Here in Britain, the heat wave is far less dangerous, but it is disruptive, delaying trains as the rails have buckled, and forcing speed restrictions to be imposed in many parts of the country. A road in Cambridgeshire, damaged as the temperatures have risen and then stayed high day after day. All because of a pattern of weather in which hot air has been flowing towards us from record-breaking conditions in southern Europe. The heat wave in Britain is not exceptional, but it does come as temperatures on average are rising. The Met Office says that we're getting more hot days and more hot nights, and the warm nights make it hard to sleep and also mean buildings and streets don't cool down. And scientists say we'd better get used to this. The UN Climate Panel says more heat waves are very likely, and a new study just published says 48% of the world's population face deadly heat waves by the end of the century, and that's assuming we cut the greenhouse gases warming the climate. In Arizona, a heat wave with a surprising impact. At Phoenix Airport, one of the busiest in the world, some planes are grounded because the temperature reached 48 degrees Celsius, and that's too hot for them to fly. And more of this may be on the way.
Global temperatures are rising, largely due to our emissions of carbon dioxide and other greenhouse gases into the atmosphere. And that means that our average temperatures in the UK, for example, are also rising, which means that when we get the weather conditions for causing a heat wave, like we're seeing now, it means that heat wave is hotter and we're going to see more of them.
With heat warnings across Europe, tourists struggle to shelter from the sun in Bordeaux. Fountains offer some welcome respite. There are, of course, ways of coping with a heat wave. Fans are in huge demand in Portugal. But if the scientists are right, scenes like this will soon seem normal. David Schuckman, BBC News.
The incoming leader of Hong Kong has told the BBC she can't guarantee that freedom of speech will protect those who call for independence from China. Carrie Lam is the chief executive-elect of the former British colony, which is about to mark 20 years since its handover to China. She's been talking to our China editor, Carrie Gracie.
20 years since Hong Kong returned to China, and its leaders are often accused of being Beijing's puppets. They're chosen not by the public, but by an establishment committee. Carrie Lam won 777 votes.
How can you claim to represent all the people of Hong Kong with only that number?
Well, I don't think it is a question of a number. The question is about legitimacy. I know perception is important, but to say that I am just a puppet, I won this election because of pro-Beijing forces, is sort of a failure to acknowledge what I have done in Hong Kong over the last 36 years. So I have pledged that as part of my governance style, I will be engaging all sectors of the community, especially the young people.
3 years ago, young people made their own effort to engage with a massive democracy protest that brought the heart of Hong Kong to a standstill for months. They won nothing, and now some say the only way to get democracy is independence from China. Beijing sees such calls as a threat to national security.
I think Hong Kong is an inseparable part of the People's Republic of China.
You think so? What if other Hong Kong citizens disagree? What if they wanted to call for independence?
They disagree in a form of being an expression of personal opinion. Then everybody could have a view. You could condemn him and so on. But whether that expressing a view constitutes an offense, then we have to look at what the law says.
What's the answer?
We'll have to look at what the law says.
Can you promise the people of Hong Kong that never in your tenure will someone go to jail for calling for autonomy, self-determination or independence?
Well, I can promise the people of Hong Kong that we will abide by the rule of law.
So that's a no, you can't make the promise.
No. How can you promise when you don't know the actual situation, when you don't know the actual legislation in Hong Kong, and to give a sort of perpetual situation answer? I don't think that is a very fair question to ask.
China's influence in Hong Kong is growing. Some of it open, some of it not. Last year, there was public outrage over the suspected abductions of publishers whose books were critical of Chinese leaders. They were held on the mainland and forced to make televised confessions. Even after their return to Hong Kong, most have stayed silent about what happened.
The Hong Kong police force have been working on this case and trying to collect evidence and come to a view, but unfortunately without the cooperation of the people involved, it's just not possible.
So do you think it's possible that those Hong Kong citizens are afraid to speak up about what happened to them? Do you think that's a possibility?
I don't know. I don't know.
So how many Hong Kong citizens need to disappear before you start to draw any conclusions about what might be happening to them?
I think that is not a fair question. We are not here to quantify that sort of allegation. But if there are worries that there have been undue interference into Hong Kong affairs, which should come under a high degree of autonomy, then the chief executive has to reflect those sentiments and speak up on behalf of the people.
Yeah, so would it be fair to imagine that you might have a conversation with President Xi which goes, please make sure that no security services from the mainland operate undercover on Hong Kong soil? Will you be having that conversation?
Well, I will be very honored to have a conversation with President Xi on occasions, hopefully on the 1st of July.
Carrie Lam, thank you so much for joining us.
Pleasure.
Carrie Gracie there, our China editor, talking to the incoming chief executive of Hong Kong. Tennis then, and the world number one, Andy Murray, has been knocked out of the tournament at Queen's. He was there to defend his championship title, but lost in straight sets to Jordan Thompson, ranked 90th in the world, as our correspondent Andy Swiss reports now.
Back on home turf. For Andy Murray, a return to the grass courts of London normally spells success, but his hopes of a record 6th Queen's title fell at the first. His opponent Jordan Thompson was a late replacement, but he hardly played like one. Murray was strangely error-strewn, come a first set tiebreak with costly results. That wasn't in the script, and it didn't get any better. Thompson, the world number 90 no less, conjuring the performance of his life, while Murray's customary precision was all too wayward. The outcome, one of the biggest shocks in the tournament's history, and for Murray, plenty to think about.
Obviously didn't play how I would like today, and that's something that I'll speak to about my with my team, get back to work and prepare for Wimbledon.
And with less than a fortnight until that Wimbledon title defence, he'll be hoping this is his summer's only early exit. Andy Swiss, BBC News.
Sam Mendes is the Oscar-winning director who's responsible for what many critics say is the biggest stage triumph of the year, The Ferryman, which is about to open in London's West End. Mendes has collaborated with the writer Jez Butterworth, whose last play, Jerusalem, was a massive hit on both sides of the Atlantic. Our arts editor, Will Gompertz, has been to meet them both.
You're on a ship with the Rolling Stones, the Beatles and Led Zeppelin. It hits an iceberg. There's only room in the lifeboat for you plus one of those legendary combos. 3 seconds, go.
Led Zeppelin? The Ferryman is set in 1981 in a farmhouse in rural Northern Ireland.
Save Led Zeppelin?
Just said I would. There's a party atmosphere as the carnies rev up for the annual harvest festivities. But an unwelcome visitor will change the tune and bring the troubles home.
It is the life force that's in the play is overpowering. That sense that it's people struggling to make sense of their life that you get with the greatest drama. That they're just trying to find out why they're here and how to get through. And in a world where we're doing that all the time at the moment in the face of violence, in the face of living with violence and terrorism, to see a story about a family struggling with those very things, however far away it now seems 30 years ago, it still feels very contemporary.
Paddy Considine and Laura Donnelly play the flirtatious brother and sister-in-law in this new play by Jez Butterworth, who does not write by the book.
Is it almost an out-of-body experience?
Completely.
I know it's working when I have the least to do with it, where you're just clinging on for dear life. I obviously have devices and I have a sense of structure that I can help the play out with. But really, if I'm overly doing that, it's going to end up being a stuffed bird. It won't fly. You've got to make these things fly, and they have to contain a kind of a magic.
Jez Butterworth worked on the Bond film Spectre with Sam Mendes, a director who thinks
movies are in a parlour state at the moment. You're either making a $200 million movie or you're making a movie for $5 million, and there's very little in between.
So you can't make the movies you necessarily want to make?
I think it's more difficult to find them, yes, and much more difficult. I mean, look, I couldn't make American Beauty, Road to Perdition, Jarhead, Revolutionary Road now and release them in cinemas. Nobody would pay for them.
maybe it's a case of film's loss is theatre's gain.
Sam has an extraordinary ability to just organise 1,000 things in front of you that are all going wrong into a shape that works, almost like the mechanics of it. It's just got a fantastic
And are you
sense
comfortable with
of
that?
it. Hugely, yeah.
Yeah.
Look, if it makes it, better, still got my name on it.
And come the awards season, there's a good chance his name will also be on the Best New Play shortlists. Will Gompertz, BBC News.
The play of the year, they say, The Ferryman, moving into London's West End. That's all from us tonight. Apologies again for the technical problems which affected the start of the programme. Now on BBC One, it's time for the news where you are. Have a good night.